I'm François Banex. I'm the director of the Center for Nanotechnology and the faculty in chemical engineering here at the University of Washington. And I'm also running one of the facilities that is going into the basement of the molecular engineering building. And it's really a great pleasure to actually moderate the second part of this presentation that is going to deal about biotechnology. And you will see how complementary things can be when you're looking at clean tech and biotechnology, because biotechnology can really enable, beyond new medicine, maybe new ways of producing fuels and making things more efficient. And today our first speaker is going to be Carol Dahl, and I'm very excited about this because Carol is going to bring a very different perspective from the science that you've heard this morning. She's going to tell us about the work that she's doing as executive director of the Lemelson Foundation, which is pushing innovation and inventors in terms of making the world a better place and serving people. Carol started at the NIH. She was involved in the early stages of the Human Genome Research Institute, and then she became director of the Office of Technology and Industrial Relation at NCI. And she then worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She was, in fact, responsible for starting the Grand Challenge Exploration Program and a number of the big programs that the foundation has run so far. So we have a very deep connection with the Pacific Northwest with Carol, and it's a pleasure to have her here.
Thank you. I want to thank Pat and everyone for the invitation to come today. This has been a fun for me to hear all of the new technology. As was mentioned, I'm presenting maybe a slightly different type of presentation than you've heard up until this point or likely to hear this afternoon. I'm very excited about the new organization, the new institute, and the facilities that it's bringing to bear for this important area in molecular engineering and sciences. And I wanted today to take a little bit of maybe personal time to reflect on how far molecular engineering and sciences have come, a little bit of reflection from my own period in working in this space, and then talk a little bit about potential for the future. So maybe I'll just go ahead and get started. Wanted to start by just reflecting on what I found on the website about Molecular Engineering and Sciences Institute, and there were 3 points made on the website about what the mission was. And an intellectual accelerator to bring fresh approaches and ideas to societal grand challenges in sustainable energy and materials and in medical therapeutics and diagnostics. A physical incubator where new interdisciplinary teams can come together in a shared space, and a place to promote collaborative molecular scale research. A bold and exciting vision. My comments today are really, as I said, going to be a bit of personal indulgence, so I hope that you bear with me, and I hope you find it interesting too. Which is, I'm starting with a few reflections, and really it comes from that first statement about what the core mission of this institute is, which is to take a step back and say, what has been the progress in molecular engineering and sciences? And so why is this time the time for this type of an institute to be launched? And then reflect on the mission you've set for yourself to actually have impact on societal grand challenges. And so what are those societal grand challenges? What are the challenges that are out there today, and how can you have impact on them? And then I want to reflect, lastly, on what it takes to have impact, and maybe weave in some of the themes we heard over lunch. I thought the lunchtime discussion was particularly interesting because it's a statement that there's more than just the science and the scientific discovery that needs to happen, but actually a vision of how to translate that into impact and future. And so I'll touch on that a little bit at the end. So just starting with progress in molecular engineering and science, so much has happened. It's really been a phenomenal set of decades that have happened. And I want to start from my own personal beginning sort of in this space. I was an academic researcher back in the 80s, and decided to go to the NIH in 1990 to be part of working on the Human Genome Project. And I remember when I arrived, it was really interesting. I'd been doing sequencing in my own lab and working on that, and I went into a study section where they were looking at the first set of large-scale sequencing grants that what was then called the National Center for Human Genome Research was going to do. And there was a big argument going on by all these experts who were on the panel for the study section, saying, you know, I don't know if we can fund these grants with automated sequencers. Okay, so these were the grants that were building off of the ABI technology that Lee Hood had brought forward a few years prior, and saying, you know, I think we're going to go with scaling up graduate students. We'll just massively parallel graduate students get this thing done, right? And I thought, wow, is that really how we're going there? I've been there. That wasn't fun. I was one of those graduate students, you know. And so I thought, you know, maybe that's not the right tack. And it's interesting. They took a risk. They funded a few people, one of whom is here on your faculty, Bob Waterston, for taking automated sequencing to that next stage. And, you know, what's interesting was a couple years down the line, so I cited here, these are some slides I pulled from my own repository of old slides, that we used at the time to talk about the path forward. And we saw very early on, and it was introduction to semiconductor technology and the potential for micro electromechanical systems and fluidic systems to actually transform things from, you know, large slabs to capillaries to microcapillaries and on, that would actually take us to the end of the genome project. And so we talked about automation, parallelism, I'm not even sure if that's appropriate English, miniaturization, but actually how did we get to smaller sizes as a way of enabling a higher throughput, higher quality molecular analysis. And what did we think it would bring? Increasing numbers of parameters, supporting integrated systems, increased sensitivity, reduced cost, enable new application platforms. And the genomic approach, the vision that one could take the same kind of high throughput approach we thought we were taking to the genome project into looking at the products of the genome, which led the way for what is now a very revolutionary new approach to looking at all members of the products of the genome in highly parallel and high throughput ways to get a picture of the entire system and how one can manipulate that system. So it's interesting, in 2003, when the first draft of the human genome was done, some of the successes that were cited, which I guess you can read up on the screen if you're in the front, is around functional analysis and the ability to actually take things forward in that more comprehensive molecular analysis way. And it was interesting, this was from March 1995 when we put out a solicitation for improved electrophoretic DNA sequencing technology. At that point, we could do 7 million bases raw per year per instrument, right? And we thought, you know, we were cooking, but that wasn't going to be good enough to get through the genome. And so 700,000 finished bases per year per instrument was where we were at. Think about what has changed. I was listening today, actually, I was a little late getting here because I was fascinated by the timing of an NPR story that was on this morning talking about the Human Genome Project and DNA sequencing and talking about the fact that now you can do a human genome, right? A few weeks, you know, we're talking about not billions of dollars, but actually talking about thousands of dollars. And we see a path to the future that's going to take us to even lower prices under $1,000 per genome in the matter of hours rather than even weeks and months and years. So in this, we visioned that there was a dramatically improved DNA sequencing technology that could be developed through miniaturization and automation to get to state-of-the-art genomic sequencing, approaches that could create a path to sequencing devices with higher throughput and lower cost. So that actually came to be. It's amazing, right? We can look at genomes from all types of organisms and understand what's going on in the DNA and are beginning to get a more full picture of the molecular analysis. So let's step forward 5 years. 2000, where were we then? At that time I was at the National Cancer Institute. And what we realized that all of this information was actually going to lead forward for an opportunity where you could not only take and gather more information and really learn the science of what was going on in the cell at the molecular level and have the pathways and networks and begin to think about manipulating them. But actually these reductions in scale were taking us to a new set of enablements in terms of technology, that working in the nanoscale, we actually were getting new types of activities that we could do with nanoscale materials. So we saw the opportunity for further reductions in scale, actually taking us down to working at the level of biology itself, at the level of molecules and structures that were actually at the size that the cells operated at already. And so nanoscale science advances you see here, as well as nanoscale technology advances. And at the bottom you see here just the beginnings of the first glimmers that one could actually create devices that would function at these levels that were machines in and of themselves. And so we saw the opportunity for the future to create and couple those capabilities to create those integrated multifunctional systems from the improved chemistries and micro and nanoscale devices with the expanding knowledge that this high throughput, miniaturized, parallel processing of molecular information would get us in terms of understanding to create devices that could actually have capabilities modeled after living systems. And I think that's where we are today, and I think it's very exciting. So I'm going to share with you actually one of the more fun programs I was involved in, which was actually at the time of another election that may be memorable for some of you here in the room. But this was in a Time magazine, that particular issue. It was a write-up on a little program that we had started called the Unconventional Innovations Program. And that program led to a partnership with NASA. NASA at the time had a very ambitious administrator who believed that we could send men to Mars in 2020. But one of the biggest gaps in doing that was actually around medical care. If you actually think about sending people in a manned vehicle to Mars with no possibility of having health services, you've got a major problem. And so the idea was, the vision we'd put forward in Unconventional Innovations was about these nanoscale equipped, in a sense, tools and devices and technologies that could go into the body, find the sources of the problem, treat the sources of the problem in a highly selective way. And so I pulled out one quote here. Devices less than 1,000th the diameter of a human hair that can scan the body for molecular signatures of cancer. The sensors could treat cancers one cell at a time, leaving healthy ones unharmed. And I think we're going to hear this afternoon a little bit about that kind of vision. I know Pat himself has work ongoing in his lab that could fall into the category of this vision we had that we hoped for. So let's flash forward then another 4 or 5 years and look at what happened at that point. And what was exciting then was synthetic biology was being birthed. And so a copy pulled out here, I think this was from Science, in January of 2004, an article about microbes made to order, the vision that in fact we could take and actually from our understanding of the pathways and processes actually turn to engineering those in ways that would create improved products, improved solutions for solving health problems. At the time I was at the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation, and that foundation was very excited to find that a researcher was interested in taking that technology to what had been the very most neglected problems and diseases, those of the poorest populations. In fact, we're lucky enough to have Jay Kiesling here today. But he stepped to the plate to say, well, I'm going to try to take this technology to a problem set that's actually for the poorest populations in the world and potentially bring with it the kinds of cost efficiencies that we need to make the drugs for treating malaria affordable and acceptable for those populations. And so a lot of excitement about the promise of synthetic biology and where it could take us. So what you see even in the past sort of 30 years has been a phenomenal change from the idea of taking decades to sequence one human genome to the power of looking at things through highly parallel, highly sophisticated and quantitative approaches to not just cells in bulk, but single cells, probing individual cells, molecular pathways, et cetera. And on that path, the path of reduction in scale in terms of the tools we use to actually understand the biology, as well to take impact on the biology by stepping in and influencing it, has changed dramatically. And it's been a path of reduction in scale. And now we see these things all coming together, and I think very much the definition that was done at molecular engineering at lunch, I'm not sure I can replicate, but I would say certainly the power of taking things at the level that the cell functions on, the size of molecules, the size of organelles, et cetera, and being able to create our own tools that are modeled on nature, but perhaps improvements to solve the problems of the day, is an enormous opportunity for biology right now. So if one takes those kind of reflections on the past 30 years and says, you know, what are the opportunities going forward today? What are the societal grand challenges today? Well, I talked to you a little bit about my own experience for the last 20-odd years in that space. The genome started before 1990. Really the thought that, you know, if we could just get that one copy, we'd just be in it. We'd really know what was going on, recognizing how much more complicated it was. The idea that one could take that kind of information to complex diseases, probably one of the most complex set of diseases, cancer, and actually create new tools that would be individualized and specified for the type of cancer you had. And then one could actually take the technologies that came with this whole process and create new vehicles for creating biological change. That's where we stand today. And so today, what are the challenges? Well, the challenges actually are the ones that you want to address in the new institute. And I start here in the US and say, well, do we have some vision? In fact, when President Obama was elected, about a year or so later, he came out with his own scientific priorities and grand challenges. And this was done in a white paper that was released on September 20th, and some of this was reflected in the State of the Union that year as well, September 20th, in a year and a half after he was on board. And so he spoke about the 3 top priorities he saw for science in the US in his first term around clean energy, advanced vehicle technology, and improvements in healthcare technologies. And also alluded to what he thought would be a series of additional grand challenges that would come from other agencies specifying the needs in this area. And in fact, we've seen that. We see places like, in fact, USAID looking at global challenges, putting out grand challenges that one can respond to. So in fact, grand challenges are emerging, but energy and health tend to be resounding themes. So let's step forward and say, where else? Let's look at a particular discipline and say, are there grand challenges in that discipline? Well, in fact, the National Academy of Engineering announced grand challenges actually in 2000, so preceding Obama's list. And in fact, you'll see there, I've not so cleverly coded the energy and sustainability ones in green, and then the health ones in purple. But you'll see that of the 14 grand challenges they put forward, 4 of them were in sustainability and or energy, and 4 of them were actually around health and the importance in health. So resounding statement that these are 2 of the most important current problems of our time, certainly for this nation. And then I'll step back and say, well, you know, so this nation's actually got it pretty good. You know, things are good. You have healthcare problems. You have great opportunities to have them taken care of. The issues of sustainability here, we can buy our way out of a lot, at least for a temporary basis. But there are a large numbers of people in the world who don't have access to the kind of facilities, healthcare, and even access to energy that we have here. And so the Millennium Development Goals were put in place before 2000, and the goal was really by 2015 to make major dents in these top 8 goals. And here you see most clearly that health stands out as a huge, huge area of need in the developing countries for the poorest populations. And so eradicating extreme poverty and hunger, one of the major pieces in there is around nutrition. It's not just about hunger, it's about quality of nutrition. Reducing child mortality rates. Really, how do you reduce the level of death that is currently happening for children under 5? There's a goal to actually reduce by 2/3 the mortality of children under 5. So just to put it in perspective, right? They're currently, 2008, it's the best numbers we have from the World Bank, which is sort of the world's monitor on these sorts of metrics. 1.4 billion people out of the 7 billion on Earth are living at under $1.25 a day, so extreme poverty, right? And more than 2 billion, 2.5 billion, so more than 1/3 of the world's population is living at under $2 a day. Those people, by and large, do not have access to adequate health care. They also don't have access to energy. They don't also have access to clean water, sanitation, et cetera. Just to give you a sense of that, basically, you know, the number of people who are suffering from hunger is about 1/5 of the kids in the world. they're underweight in the developing countries. Those kids are residing. Child health, you know, children are dying at an incredibly high rate. We have 9 million children dying before their 5th birthday in the world, and those are predominantly kids in the developing countries. Maternal health, there's been a push to reduce maternal mortality ratio by 3/4 in the Millennium Development Goals, but still 350,000 women die each year because of childbirth and or pregnancy-related risks. Their chance is 1 in 30 in sub-Saharan Africa. So 1 in 30 events, the woman dies. It leaves 1 million kids as orphans each year. So huge opportunity for change in health. We see that along the way. Environmental sustainability, they weren't so clear about at the time this was done. I think we've learned a lot more over the past few years, and perhaps political will is more open to the change. But they did actually speak to the need for policies and processes that would ensure sustainability of technologies for the future, and sustainability in the sense of sustainability for the world and the environment as well. So challenges are out there and we need to address them. So let me turn to how do you create impact. So we start with a vision of molecular engineering and science has come such a long way. The progress is phenomenal, the pace at which it's happening. We know that there are lots of challenges out there, and the huge number of them sit in the space of health and also in the space of energy and sustainability. So how to create impact? Well, I'm going to turn back to what I think are 3 key points, and that takes us back to some of the things that were discussed over lunch and also some of the things that were highlighted in my own background, which is around accelerating discovery. So there's a great mission here to accelerate the discovery of molecular science here at the Institute, and a vision that that can be enhanced by collaboration and access to all types of technologies that will help actually do this sort of analysis you need to do discovery. But to have discovery and not have it come to fruition in terms of impact and solutions on the grand challenges that the world is now facing would be an academic accomplishment, but probably not a great satisfaction in terms of what one achieves. So one needs to actually take the next step, which is to translate ideas to inventions, products, and solutions. And that's actually part of the goal that's stated for this institute, and an admirable one. I'm going to turn to that in just a minute and talk a little bit about what I think it takes to do that. And then finally, I would comment that that's great. It'd be great if you could make major dents in the problems of today. But in fact, the opportunity, particularly because you're an educational organization, is to actually see change for the future. You have a huge potential for amplification effect by how you actually train, educate, and create the problem solvers of tomorrow. And so I'd like to make a few comments about that as well. So at the Lemelson Foundation, a little bit about us. We are founded by one of the most prolific independent U.S. inventors, Jerry Lemelson. He had over 600 patents. Of those 600, some came to some major impact. And when he began to see the input of his investment in his creativity over the course of his life in his late years, he actually created the foundation because he had a strong sense that the U.S. had lost sight of what was core to its strength as an economy, which is its power for invention and innovation and the translation of that to jobs and businesses. And so he created the foundation around that goal. Now, about 10 years ago, that was in the 90s, about 10 years ago, the family recognized the power of this same approach of invention, innovation, and entrepreneurship, having the potential for impact on the lives of the poorest populations in the developing countries, and hence we work in that space too. But we think about invention around this pathway, and actually it's the pathway of how one creates solutions and products, which say you need to have people who are inspired about the idea, the science, the discipline of engineering, or even the problem they want to solve. You need to equip them with an education that will help them to solve the problem, and then you can set them free to actually begin to invent and to take those inventions through the innovation process into products, and ultimately into products that go into companies, because companies are in fact the best way we know to get things distributed and fully accessible to people and out to market. And so we work to inspire and enable the next generation of inventors and invention-based enterprises, and we work to support it in terms of strengthening the U.S. economy, as well as looking for social and economic change in the developing countries for the poorest populations. So I'm not going to talk about us, but I want to talk about some of the principles under here, and I just found this a handy slide, which is to say that you have the potential to have impact on all of these areas. But in fact, there are two ways invention primarily occurs. One is the discovery process. So it's very interesting that this institute is named both engineering and science. Science, as a scientist, for me, has been about a process of discovery. Learning, finding, asking questions, validating answers. And from that come learnings that can actually be brought to application. But we don't always train people to use what they're learning as a way of identifying ways to solve problems. Now, engineering is much more, in some ways, practical from my perspective, but I'm not an engineer, so I may be saying something wrong, which is to say, you know, we have the skills and tools and power to actually make change, but sometimes maybe doesn't step back to say, how do I make sure that the questions I'm asking are actually the most important, most relevant questions? And so, both on the discovery side of science and the engineering side of problem solving, I think there is room for ensuring that that turns into not just ideas and papers and so on, or to devices that can't get out to people and actually have impact on their lives, but actually requires some methodical thinking to get them down the path through innovation, entrepreneurship to products. So we tend to think about that as the invention enterprise blueprint. So we focus a lot on invention, obviously you hear that, but it's really about how do you take an idea to a product and then get it out there so it has impact on people's lives. And what we see, primarily because of what you see as failures in companies rather than successes, because if there are successes it becomes sort of transparent, you don't see it, is that they tend to fail in three areas. And those are the three areas that are critical to contemplate as you think about bringing an idea to fruition and translating to practice. So the first is, we believe, because we believe in invention, that it needs to be based on great science, technology, engineering, and math skills. So you have to start with a strong foundation. This university has that strong foundation. What's important is actually getting kids excited about it. It's unfortunate that about half of the kids who start engineering programs in the US drop out. And I think one might ask the question of whether our generation, instead of trying to weed those students out and disappoint them in terms of what they thought were career aspirations, learn how to educate them more effectively to keep them in those disciplines and encourage them to stay in those disciplines and become effective. So technological innovation is important and is derived from those STEM disciplines. The second piece one really needs is a problem well defined from user context and needs. So if you have something but nobody wants it, then it probably isn't really of that much value. And I have to say, as a scientist, my experience has been the scientists tend to think, well, if it makes sense and it's scientifically correct, then of course people are going to want it. And that's how you kill a great company, because that's not enough. The population who's going to be your customer base and take value from it has to actually appreciate it. And so it's really important from the very beginning, not after you've developed the technology, but from the very start, to engage with the population that you think is going to actually be the recipient for the technology for the long haul. And then also self-sustaining business proposition. A lot of times people forget to actually do the math and figure out, is there a way that this will actually become so self-sustaining over the long run in terms of the numbers about the business proposition. What are people willing to pay? What kind of behavioral change are they willing to make that's tied to that? And will that actually become self-sustaining in terms of creating a demand? And can I get my costs down when I scale up manufacturing? Can it be manufactured? How am I going to do that? Where am I going to do that? And how is that going to work? We found that increasingly it appears that user-centered design is a key portion of how those companies become successful. That iterative, going back, questioning, asking, and refining at the technology and also at the business proposition and also from the understanding of the user context is critical for those businesses. So I think one of the challenges as you do your discovery and engineering is actually to engage in those two other areas in addition to the technology, which is to say, how do you actually figure out where your customer base would be. How do you get a market assessment? How do you actually get a vision of what it is that the consumer would want from you? And my guess is our speaker here this morning from General Motors certainly works with a team that does that effectively, or they wouldn't still be in business. But it's something that needs to start early for those in academia to partner to get that kind of input. And then self-sustaining business proposition. I think it's important for scientists and engineers to have a sense of what it takes to translate and how that then leads to products and businesses that actually can become self-sustaining. And so maybe there's a step we need to take in helping to educate ourselves as well as students coming through about those pieces. Now, as we think about it, so I kind of talked about the enterprise, the actual business. You need all those pieces to make a successful business. And as you think about translating technologies, you're going to want to make sure to build those things in, which may mean that you need deep linkages with people who have that experience, whether they be experienced entrepreneurs or people from business faculty, et cetera. But also, as you step back, you say, well, who's going to feed that pipeline? And that's about the students. And so how do you get students engaged in a way that sets them up for the future to be those creative forces for future companies, future products, and future problem solving? Once again, 3 critical pieces. Knowledge of STEM principles. How do you make sure they have a solid STEM education, science, technology, engineering, math? How do we teach them questioning and empathy? One of the key points about interfacing with customers and user needs is you actually have to be able to listen. Not to come in and tell them why what you're doing is right for them, but rather to hear what their needs and challenges are. We see particularly in people trying to solve these problems in developing countries, the greater your social cultural divide is from the customer you want to serve, the more you actually need to get in there and actually learn from them and hear from them, because your own interpretation is not necessarily going to be appropriate or relevant because of the difference in sociocultural context. Entrepreneurial, so how do we actually train people to have those kind of skills? Not just problem solving, but actually problem identification, questioning, empathy. Entrepreneurial thinking. I think it's great, it would be great if every student actually had some exposure to what entrepreneurship was about, what it takes to be, to create a business and have a value proposition in business. It will help them to begin to think about, when they have that new discovery, what can it translate to? How can it have an impact? And what steps would they need to go through to actually see that path through? So I want to share with you, and what we have found is in terms of education, hands-on experiences and creativity are essential. In fact, that's one of the things that they point out that causes kids to drop out of engineering in many schools the first couple of years is inadequate exposure to actually doing the thing they came to do, which is getting in there and getting their hands dirty, right? So how do we actually get kids involved early with that? So I want to talk to you a little bit about an example. So can this be done, and is it an effective way of teaching people? And in fact, I think it is. About 15 years ago, Jerry Lemelson, our founder, began a program which is now called the National Collegiate Inventors and Innovators Alliance. I'm curious how many people in the room have heard of it? Oh, we got 1, 2 hands. Okay, not much. So you're all members here if you're from the University of Washington, just so you know. There are about 200 academic institutions that are members of this alliance. And the goal of the alliance is really about supporting technology innovation and entrepreneurship in higher education to create experiential learning opportunities and successful, socially beneficial innovations in businesses. So they've been doing this for about 15 years, and they've had tremendous reach in terms of students. They fund 4 different really types of activities. One is that they fund universities who are members of the Alliance can actually go to them to get funding for creating coursework and educational programs that will be around stimulating invention, innovation, and entrepreneurship. So how do you actually train your students in a way that will get them thinking in this way? The second thing they do is actually run courses. And so a number of students probably here at the university have been there, but you should be aware of the opportunity, which is to participate in training that runs from either 1 day or 2 different types of intensity of 5-day programs that actually help you launch and start your business. And so really can take you from an idea a student may have with their mentor or whatever in the lab to starting a business and learning about entrepreneurial skills. And then they also fund some of those ventures, and many of those ventures end up getting funding from other sources. And so the training is sufficient to get them out there and get funding from venture capital or state-run funding agencies like Mass Design funds those sorts of projects even outside of Massachusetts. And then they also support a network of educators who share experiences about what works and what doesn't work in terms of stimulating innovation, invention, and entrepreneurship in the higher education environment. So they do fund university inventors. About $1.25 million is given annually to students in small funding amounts that allows them to begin to prototype their business, get it off the ground, and then those students tend to go on and compete for other funds. They've done about 180 businesses have been launched through this program over the last 15 years, so it's more in the later years each year. But you can figure about 10 a year have come out of that on average, 10 to 15. And 130 of those are still going. And they've leveraged over $300 million in terms of other funding, follow-on funding that's come to those businesses. And some of those exemplar businesses actually have been businesses that are targeting, for instance, the developing countries and working in the developing countries. One of them, Promethean, came out of a group at MIT who had an idea about how to more effectively chill milk. Was really about cooling systems. They're now going to apply it to other things. But in developing countries, it's a huge issue because the farmers come at variable times. There's no refrigeration. If they miss the pickup time, they lose all the value for their milk. And so they needed cost-effective chilling systems to improve the quality of the milk and allow smallholder farmers to get impact from that. They just recently won the first State Department Indo-US Partnership Award, and they've also begun to receive funding from other commercial investors around building this business in India. It's an example of the kind of companies that they create. Here's some of the companies that are out there. And some have been around longer than others. This one, Ecovative, that's in the middle, is actually about how you use material that's generated by fungus and mushrooms to create insulation materials and other kinds of packing materials that are environmentally friendly, actually extremely robust and low cost. And so creative ideas on the sustainable front as well. So a lot of things ongoing. I want to encourage you to take a look at it. There's an opportunity for this institution, because you are members, to actually leverage this, and it may be an opportunity for this institute to think about training and programs that would get your students thinking about how to translate their technologies into companies. We see a lot of enthusiasm in the universities for entrepreneurship, but inadequate training and opportunities. So I'm going to close up. I think I'm kind of at the end of my time, which is to say that I want to come back to these 3 points. I think there's an incredible opportunity to build on what has happened in the past, the acceleration of understanding about what is going on in biology, in the cells, and in the molecular processes to accelerate the discovery to create new solutions. Those solutions will only happen, I think, if you in fact translate the ideas into inventions, products, and solutions. And so the way of doing that is actually to think about early on who's going to be the customer, how do you engage them, what do you need to know about it, what kind of performance characteristics do you need to hit in that technology, and then build the partnerships that will begin to see what is the business opportunity for a sustainable venture. And then training the problem solvers of the future. The way you amplify your impact is not just to create your own, but actually you have the opportunity to influence the next generation and make a huge impact in terms of creating a next generation of problem identifiers, solvers, and business creators who can actually solve the grand challenges, not just for this generation, but for the future. And so I want to thank you again for inviting me. It's been a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying listening to the science, and I look forward to interacting with many of you at the break. Thanks.